And so what I want to do, just quickly now, is follow through three themes which I think come out of these chapters. There's an outline in the handouts if that helps you. Worth saying as well, on the front there's a little QR code, and if you scan that in, you'll be able to get kind of live subtitles in Microsoft Translate. So if English is hard for you, if it would help you to be able to read what I'm saying in another language, and the QR code is there on the front to help with that. But three kind of themes to pull out, to chew over together, which I hope will help us as we come to read this book on our own, perhaps over the coming weeks, and then think about it together. The first theme is this: God planned and promised to fill his world with an extended family who worship him. God planned and promised to fill his world with an extended family who worship him. This is a theme really that runs right the way through the Bible from start to finish. We sung about it, God's people in God's place under his rule. But it's a theme that runs through Exodus. So Exodus opens by focusing our attention on one family, the family of a man called Israel, also known as Jacob. He was Abraham's grandson. And the opening verses remind us that the family had moved to Egypt to join Joseph there, one of Jacob's sons, famous for his multicoloured coat and his dreams. The family had moved to Egypt, but now, verse 6, Joseph, his brothers, all of that generation have died. Generations have passed. And the question is, well, what's going to happen now to this family in Egypt? So verse 7, the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful, we're told. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Now, I tell you that the writer is repeating a theme that has come earlier in the Bible. So right back at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 1, we heard the same words. There, we're told God blessed them, speaking of humankind, and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it." See, God's plan from the very beginning was to fill his world with an extended family who worship him. From the beginning, people were created to be little servant kings, bearing the image of the great servant king, who we know better as Jesus, and to extend his rule across his world. But people rejected that plan and their privileged place within it. People ruled instead for themselves and not for the great servant king. They worshipped other things instead of the God who'd made them. People opposed the plan, but the plan didn't change. In fact, God would go on to repeat this plan to Noah, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob and his family. God promised that they would be fruitful and increase. God promised his plan for creation would carry on through his people. So here we are at the start of Exodus, this family of the promise. They've been blessed by God to do what he had planned for them. All the pieces aren't in place yet. There are people, it's not quite clear that they're living in the right place, or even that they really know God and are living under his rule. But the plan hasn't changed. The question is not, will God keep his promise, but how will God keep his promise? Now that, I guess, is still true for us today. The God of the Exodus hasn't changed. His plans, his purposes haven't changed. We're invited still to take our place in his plans and to be who we were created to be. He will fill his creation with little servant kings who extend the rule of the great servant king Jesus. And through Jesus' death and resurrection and the sending of his Spirit, we're invited to take our place in his family and to take our part in his plan. See, this extended family of God that we know better as the church is growing in his world, and it's not a sideshow. It's the very reason why God made the world. It's why God and Jesus' call to be his disciples and to make disciples, it's not a new thing and it's not a small thing. To be a disciple, helping to make disciples, people who live for and with Jesus, is the purpose for which we were created. Now, all the pieces aren't in place yet. We might wonder how it is that Jesus is going to keep all his promises, how he's going to put the world right, how he's going to wipe away every tear. But as we're helped to know God better through the whole of the Bible, but through this book, Exodus, the question we're to ask is not, will he do it? But how will he do it? And when will he do it? See, knowing God's plan and his promise, and knowing they keep going, helps us to keep going as his people. We'll speed up from here. Second theme for us to see. A ruler opposes God's plans and oppresses God's people. It's verses 8 to 12. A ruler opposes God's plans and oppresses God's people. So if we pick things up, verse 8. Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites, they are far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. See, God is blessing this extended family with growth, but Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, sees this growing family as a threat. So he tries to stop it. And in doing so, we're to understand he isn't just opposing this family, he's opposing God's plans. If we've read Genesis, the book that comes just before this in the Bible, well, it's not a big surprise to us. A battle has been raging since the Garden of Eden between the seed of the woman Eve, who came to trust God's promises, and the seed of the serpent, who opposed God and opposed his people. Pharaoh tries in different ways to oppose God by oppressing his people. Verse 11 to 14, he oppresses them with forced labour. But then, what do we discover? Verse 12, that the more they were oppressed by Pharaoh, the more they multiplied and spread. God's purpose is still what happens. We saw something of that in Acts before Christmas. As oppression came on the church spread and grew. We see that all around the world today. Often where there is more oppression, the church grows faster. See, that's why Pharaoh's plan fails here. He's refusing to learn, and he's going to try again. And what we see is this sort of deepening evil in his opposition to God. Pharaoh now, he instructs the Israelites to try to kill the Israelite boys. But once again, his plan fails. The midwives, they fear the Lord, and the boys are allowed to live. This theme, it's going to keep sounding again and again through Exodus, through the history of God's people. People will oppose God, they will oppress his people, but sometimes despite, but often through that oppression, through that opposition, God's plans will be worked out. God's promises will be kept. We'll see that in Exodus, as oppression serves to display God's glory and is folded into the rescue of God's people. We'll see that most of all when the rulers gather to crucify Jesus, as human opposition once again is folded into God's great rescue plan, and God's glory is displayed to the world. See, opposition will never stop God's plans because there is no one like God. Despite the seriousness of what's taking place here, there's a certain comedy about the way it's described. I think Pharaoh is made to look not shrewd but foolish. We see here Pharaoh cast not so much as powerful as impotent before God's power. And the first readers, they're supposed to see him that way. So they're not tempted to go back to Egypt. So they aren't tempted to put Pharaoh on a level with God. They're being helped to see there is no one like God. Grasping that is going to be what enables Moses to keep trusting and keep obeying God later in life when opposition comes. When mighty Pharaoh keeps saying, "No, I won't let you go. I don't know your God." Moses keeps trusting and he keeps speaking. When the people stand at the water's edge and the chariots of Egypt bear down on them and the ground is shaky underneath them, Moses is able to say, "Do not be afraid." He's realised that opposition cannot stop God's plans because there's nobody like him. And as that theme, as that tune kind of sounds time and time again in the book of Exodus, it can warm our hearts and it can strengthen our resolve, I think. Christians today, we can expect opposition. The seed of the serpent still wages war. We will be mocked and opposed in different ways for following Jesus. Your workplace might try and restrict what you can say about him. There may be times where you act to please God by doing something and you find your life just gets harder because of it. Just like the Hebrews baking bricks. In those moments, we need this theme to be part of our life's soundtrack, if you like, so that we can stick with the God of the Exodus, with the God of Easter. That's how we keep going, living with him and for him. We need to know God's plans, God's promises, they haven't changed and they will not be stopped, however things might look. See, Pharaoh opposes God's plans, oppresses God's people, and he doesn't learn. He keeps going. So he tries again, verse 22. We read, "Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." You see, this evil is spiralling down and it's horrendous, isn't it? That's why I'm saying we're not told quite what happens next or for how long. Later we find that Moses has a younger brother. And when this large extended family leave Egypt, there are vast numbers of children. We're not told everything. But the writer focuses here on the vital way in which Pharaoh's efforts fail with one particular child. As we're introduced to Moses, we see a rescuer is drawn out through, if you like, his own personal exodus. We're being shown these themes that are going to come back later. What we see here is what happens to Moses personally, individually on his own as the rescue of God's people is going to be repeated later for the whole people. Does that make sense? He experiences his own mini exodus. Let's just explore this together. Start of chapter 2, Moses' parents introduced their Levites. That's the family that will go on to be the priests. And faced with Pharaoh's terrible order to have children killed, the baby is hidden for a time. And then, I don't know, maybe he becomes a bit too big or a bit too loud for that to be possible. He's hidden in a basket. In passing, it may be interesting to know that word used for basket there only appears here and in the account of Noah's Ark to describe the ark. It's another callback to another theme, as it were, a clue that through this watery voyage that the child goes on, just as with Noah, God is going to save those he blesses and judge the wicked. Besides pointing back, though, it's also pointing forward to what is going to come in Moses' life. Just a couple of similarities, a couple of kind of musical threads to draw out for us. Verse 4, Moses' sister stands to see what will happen. Later on, by the banks of the sea, all of the people will stand to see the salvation of Yahweh. She is seeing the Exodus rescue in miniature, just as the whole people will see it come to fruition. Pharaoh's daughter hears the baby cry and shows him compassion, just as God will do for the Israelites. We're told that at the end of the chapter. And Moses travels through the water where others will drown, just as later God's people will be safely led through the water of the Red Sea and the Egyptians will drown. But Moses is adopted by Pharaoh's daughter doesn't just reverse what Pharaoh intended and show that he is impotent. It means that Moses goes from oppressed slavery to royalty. Just as God's people will be, at a stroke, freed from their slavery and become a kingdom of priests in God's extended family. See, this personal exodus is going to be defining for Moses' life and his ministry. And his name's a clue for that. The boy who was drawn out of oppression and the waters of judgment will be used by God to draw others out. He is literally the one who draws out. And then as an adult, Moses experiences a second personal exodus, again pointing us forward to the rescue that's going to come. So the oppression of a Hebrew by an Egyptian moves Moses to act for them. He kills one Egyptian. Later, the oppression of the Hebrews by the Egyptians will cause God to act again through Moses, to point forward now to the Egyptians who will be killed by the plagues, by the water, to bring justice and lift their oppression. Moses runs east then, away from Pharaoh, and spends 40 years in the deserts. The Israelites are going to run from Pharaoh, spend 40 years in the wilderness. Once there, Moses rescues from shepherds with his staff and waters a flock of sheep in the desert. Later, he's going to rescue people from a false shepherd, Pharaoh, with his staff and provide water for the whole nation in a desert. Finally, he names his son Gershom, which means an alien here. Moses is personally experiencing what the Israelites have all experienced. He's identifying with them as aliens in a land that is not their own. Moses' life contains these personal exoduses. It's a trailer for the big exodus that is to come. And what that means is that God's people can see the pattern of their rescue in the life of their rescuer. They can see the pattern of their rescue in the life of their rescuer. As we followed through Moses' early life there, maybe it sounded familiar to you. And not just because it sounds some of the themes that will come later in the Exodus. The same patterns, they come together in Jesus' life, don't they? Jesus born under the oppression of another evil king, Herod. A king who opposed God's rescue plan by killing Israelite boys. Some of us heard that from Matthew's Gospel on Christmas Day. God rescued Jesus from that king when he ran away to another country as a child. At that time he escaped to Egypt, but by doing so again he is identifying with the people who he will go on to save, living as an alien in a land not his own. See, Moses' early life doesn't just point forward to the Exodus rescue. It points forward to an even greater rescuer, Jesus. It points forward to an even greater Exodus, the first Easter. See, the God of the Exodus is the God who we know better through Jesus. I want to pause just briefly and think, why would that be significant? Why would it matter that Moses and then later Jesus would be formed, be shaped by these defining Exodus-like experiences in their lives? As one writer puts it, by the time Moses reached his kind of public exodus at the age of 80, he might be experiencing a lot of déjà vu, feeling like he's seen all this before. Why would that matter? See, along the way, Moses has come to know the God of the Exodus. He's come to grasp God's commitment to his plans, to his promises, to his people, which is how Moses can trust him and obey him and follow him. He's done it in the smaller things. when it comes to the public exodus, he can do it in the bigger things. We see the same in Jesus' life. Hebrews tells us that he learnt obedience through suffering. Jesus wasn't a kind of overnight success at the age of 30. His life has been filled with these mini Exodus events as well. He's provided with a way out from a king bent on killing him. He's given a way out from temptation in the wilderness. Jesus continually being shaped by the scriptures that reveal the God of the first Exodus. And what does that mean? It means that for Jesus, trusting God is not a theoretical thing. Obedience, trust is lived and it's learned. And what we see is Jesus living it. So that when Jesus reaches the cross, his public exodus, he trusts his Father's promises. He worships him. He knows there is nobody like him. And so he holds fast to him. It's still kind of the beginning of the year. Maybe some of us are still in the business of sort of making resolutions or making course adjustments to how we live, the patterns, rhythms of life. It's maybe worth asking the question, do you want to be useful to God as a Christian? Do you want to be useful to God as a Christian? If you do, maybe expect God to work in your life in a similar way to the way he worked with Moses and with Jesus. That is, allow yourself to be shaped, who you are, what you are for, by the Exodus that's revealed in the Scriptures. The Exodus that you went through in Christ, as it were. Allow yourself to be formed by it. Seek to be formed by the God of the Exodus, the God of Easter. And learn to trust and obey him in the small things. And then who knows what acts of service God might be preparing for you. It'd be great to pray that God forms us over the coming weeks through this Exodus. That we might be faithful to him in the small things and then perhaps in the big things. See, God's people, they get to see the pattern of their rescue in the life of their rescuer. As we close, I just want to draw out one way in which that might be significant for us. There are small ways that has implications. Usually, I guess, when things are repeated, it shows us that they're important in some way. So we're seeing with all this repetition that the Exodus matters. Jesus' life, death, resurrection, they resonate with it. It matters. I guess also when a writer kind of weaves things through a piece of literature, it usually shows us that what they're writing, they've thought about, they're writing carefully. So as we come to the Exodus, we can expect to discover a kind of richness and a depth to it. Even if we've read it many times before, there's more about what God is like that we can see and we can enjoy. There's a richness, a depth to this book. But there are some particular ways I think it matters as we begin the book. I think the big thing is that the Exodus helps us to know God for who he is. Helps us to know God for who he is. If the Exodus was just a one-off thing, out of character kind of a thing, then it wouldn't really show us what God is like. If it was out of character, it wouldn't help us to know him, would it? But the fact the Exodus doesn't just run as a pattern through Moses' life, it runs through all of God's plans, all of his purposes. It means as we come to know the God of the Exodus, we come to know God as he really is. A number of years ago, a good friend invited me to spend a week with him on holiday in Scotland. It's not where he lived, but the family had access to a house there, and they went there every year, and they had done since he was a child. And the invitation, it had a significance to it. So he wasn't just saying, come on holiday with me, this is a fun place to go on holiday. There was a sense in which he was saying, if you want to know me, if you want to really get me, who I am, what I'm like, then it's important that you see me here. Because when I'm here in this place with these people, I'm in a sense most fully and truly myself. I'm on display. The Exodus works like that, I think. To know God for who he is, to really get him, what he's like, what he's about in the world, then we need to see him in the Exodus. And as we'll see, we need to see him in the greater Exodus that is Easter. See, the Exodus helps us to know God for who he is. Which means if the God you think you know isn't the God of the Exodus, then maybe you don't know him as well as you think you do. Maybe it'd help you to come back week after week and get to know him better as we go through this Exodus account. And if you've rejected God and the idea of God, but the God you've rejected isn't the God of the Exodus, then maybe you need to look again. Don't reject a caricature. Don't reject a counterfeit. The God of the Exodus, the God of Easter, is the real deal. And maybe you feel the God of the Bible, of the Exodus of Jesus, is not really worth worshipping. Again, maybe you need to look again. To see through the Exodus, there is no one like him. Maybe that you think he's not worth following. You're tempted to think, if God cared, then my life would be easier. I expect the Israelites probably felt like that, as their lives were made bitter by hard labour. I guess they'd have thought, if God really cared, wouldn't my life be easier? Except what we're going to see is running all the way through this story is the God who is concerned for his people, the God who hasn't given up on his people, who hasn't given up on his plans or his promises to them. Exodus is going to help us to know God for who he is, so that we can grasp that there is no one like him, and so that we stick with him. Now we're going to respond now by singing. The words of our next song, they're going to give us a way to acknowledge God as the rock, the Redeemer, the one like whom there is no other. But I'd encourage us over perhaps the next couple of weeks, a great thing to do would be to read through the first 15 chapters of this book, Exodus. If you're not a big reader, maybe listen to it online. It's very easy to get hold of ways to listen to it in different languages as well. Let's be formed by this book. Let's see our rescuer in the shape of this rescue. And let's get to know this God better as we do so. But why don't we stand and sing, O Lord, my rock and my Redeemer, the God like whom there is no other.